Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com with this week's episode of the Market Monday. This week I'm going to do a top 10 list of booms and bust from Dominaria that have to do more with their price than their power level. So we're just going to analyze the current price, the pre-sale price of cards that are coming out in Dominaria, and then evaluate whether they go up or down. So this is a top 10 list. I've chosen 5 cards that I think are going to go down in value and 5 cards that I think are going to go up or have the potential of going up in value with the right things going for them in the standard or modern, whether they see play in those respective formats. All right, so without further ado, let's start with a reprint from Dominaria. This one is Gilded Lotus. Gilded Lotus is currently sitting around the $4.50 mark, which I think is very, very low for a card like Gilded Lotus that sees just an insane amount of play in the Commander format. So I like these type of cards when they're reprinted. I have made a killing off of cards like Cyclonic Rift, buying in when it was reprinted in Modern Masters 2017, and just watch the price of the card steadily go up just a few cents per day, but you give that a few months or years down the road, and the card has doubled, tripled, quadrupled in value from its low when it was reprinted. And I think Gilded Lotus is going to be the same thing. I think that this set is going to be an underwhelmingly opened set. Even though there's a lot of nostalgia in it, I don't think the value is really there. And so a card like Gilded Lotus at first is going to continue to go down slightly, go down, I would say, around the $3.50 mark, and then it's just going to continue to have these slight increases until 6 months down the road, it's going to be back up to the $5. By the time it rotates, it'll be a card that actually holds value rather than loses value. So Gilded Lotus, I like the pre-sale price of $4.50. You can probably pick these up for a lot cheaper than $4.50. It might slightly go down, but long term, this is a card I think that is just destined to go back up. If you look at the other printings in the set, we have the Gilded Lotus around the $12.50 mark from the M13 and the Meriden at $13.50. And they've had the M13 was also when this card was reprinted, it crashed the price of it and it bottomed at around $3 and then continued to just slowly gain value until it did have around its $13 price tag. So this M13 was a time when Commander wasn't the most vibrant format that it is now, and I don't think that the supply of Dominaria is going to add enough Gilded Lotus into the field, especially when a card gets lower in Commander down to this like $4, $5 range. That's the range that the more casual players will actually pick up cards. But we actually have a few players at our store that is their price on a particular card unless they really want it. And so they won't throw a Gilded Lotus into a greedy mana-based deck just because the price tag is just too high. They'd rather spend their money somewhere else. This, of course, will attract a lot of players who will just buy this based on the low price point to add a bit of an upgrade to their Commander-based deck. So again, I think the Gilded Lotus is destined to go up from its pre-sale price. On to my number 9. Number 9 is actually the most expensive card in the set. This is Karn, and Karn is currently sitting at a extremely high price of $35. And this card has stayed pretty reasonable since it was spoiled around $35. It does have a lot of things going for it. Again, this is more of a market analysis, not a power level analysis. I know they kind of go hand in hand, but sometimes it's the market has a lot where the price of a card has a lot more to do, whether or not how powerful the card is. There's a lot of factors that make it so the card will inevitably end at a supply versus demand price point. And Karn, I think, is going to have a lot of demand in formats like Casual and formats like Commander, but it's still a huge unknown how this is going to impact either Modern or Standard. And looking at the current meta, especially in Modern, there aren't a lot of decks I think actually want Karn, Scion of Urza, in their list. The +1 is kind of underwhelming. Usually we typically do like Planeswalkers that have starting loyalty very high at 5 and then have a draw type ability, but you got to keep in mind that this does give your opponent the option of giving you the lesser of the 2 cards, and then you would have to spend your next loyalty to get the actual card that you want. So it's not the greatest through going through your deck for the cards you specifically want. I understand this can be thrown in any blue control or black control or white control deck and just get you that incremental land drop, or at that point you can start finding the specific cards you want, with the -1 finding the cards with the silver counter. And the -2 is actually very reasonable by at least creating a 1/1 construct. However, it's a card that is competing with a ton of other cards in that 4-drop slot. Modern gets even worse. Commander, there might actually be better things to do. I'm not saying this card is not going to have a lot of demand. I just think that $35 is a bit inflated for a card like this. It kind of reminds me of cards like Narset, which was all about hype before it actually has seen a deck. And so 35 is just too rich for my blood. I think it's gonna, unless it comes right out the gates as a 4 of or a 3 of, or possibly even a 2 of in a standard or modern deck, it's gonna have a hard time holding this $35 price tag. The one thing that Karn does have going for it is this is going to be an awkward set as far as the whole value of the set, I think, is going to remain quite low, and then it's going to stop people from actually opening booster box for twofold. You don't need a lot of cards in 4 ofs from this particular set, so people that are just cracking packs to find their play sets are going to stop when they just want 1 or 2 ofs of a lot of legendary cards. And again, I just don't think there's going to be a lot of value to support the pack crackers. There's not any sort of expeditions or masterpieces in this set. So if a card does end up seeing play, we could see pushing $40, and if it ends up being Karn, and Karn holds all of the value from Dominaria, yeah, we could see this hold. But that's why it's my number 9. It's not further down the list, but I do think that Karn is destined to go down in the short term, and we'll have to wait and see how it pans out in those specific formats. On to my number 8 is Jaya's Immolating Inferno. I think this card is incredibly underrated. This is a 50-cent card, so it's bulk rare already. And it does have the legendary sorcery clause to it, but with 2 red and X, you get to deal X damage up to 3 targets for X. It doesn't say has to go to a creature, doesn't say have to go to a player, doesn't say has to go to specifically 3. I mean, that's Cone of Flames' problem. If anyone has played the card like Cone of Flames, you have to have 3 targets for it. You can actually just have this be a bad fireball for 2 red and X. And there aren't a lot of fireball type effects in the format at the moment. There's already the Paradox Engine type of engine for a fireball deck. And what makes this Jaya's Immolating Inferno really good is it already does pair quite good with Chandra and like Hazoret decks. I can see once you hit this for even 2 mana, when you pump 2 mana into it, so it's a 4 mana spell, this is almost getting up to the value of like a Fiery Confluence. You're doing 2 damage to up to 3 different targets. You put 5 into it, that's 9 damage split. I think that this is the problem of having to have a legendary, or either a legendary creature or a planeswalker, is going to stop this from seeing play in a ton of decks. But I think that this is a lot better than a bulk rare already. I think this will see play. This will settle off around the $2, $3 mark. It will find a home in a variety of decks that, there's still like Carry Zevs in the standard meta at the moment, which I think do pair quite well with this card. Like we said, Chandra seems to be the perfect card for this because it can actually add 2 mana. So turn 4 Chandra could equal a turn 5, where you can pump in this for 7 and then do 5 damage to 3 different targets. That seems like a blowout to me. And again, I just think that this is to already be settled down to a bulk rare is, I don't agree with it. I think this card will temporarily go up. It might eventually settle back down to the $1 mark, but I think this will see a lot more play than people are giving it credit. On to number 4 is another mythic, which I think is very overhyped right now because it seems too situational for me. And this is History of Benalia. This is a 3-drop saga. So when you cast it, when it enters the battlefield, you get a 2/2 white knight. And then on your next upkeep, you get another 2/2. And then the following turn, all knight creatures you control get +2/+1. Now, the problem with this is I think a lot of the decks that want to utilize token generation, you look at like the Monument decks and some of like the Eternalized decks and things like that, or even the traditional black-white tokens decks right now that use hidden stockpiles. The Anthem effect, once it does crack, only affects your knights. And knights are getting a lot of help in this particular set, but looking back at standard playable cards right now, there aren't too many, if any, knights that actually see play. So a lot of vampires or soldiers, for example, if you're looking for the Monument Vampires deck, or even the Black-White Vampires, if this would be splashed in. So it needs to find a home in an archetype that it is going to be the key card. And for me, that's hard to see that actually. You get a 2/2 knight for 3 mana. That's underwhelming the turn it comes out. The next turn you get another 2/2, sure. But we already have cards that can do that with a very little work into it. Like, look at the old school Gideon, for example, that put a 2/2 when it came out, and then the next turn could put out a 2/2, and then you can continue to do that. Like, people are trying to compare it to the old school Gideon or the Battle for Zendikar Gideon that got a lot of play. To me, though, this is way too narrow. That it's going to crack a lot of turns, get that +2/+1. We don't even care at that point. The tokens be fatal pushed. They can be at that point not even suitable to chump block if you're looking at like Ramming Up Red or Hazard Red. These 2/2 knights aren't going to even do a hell of a lot on turn 3, as they can't block a menace creature, for example. They're going to have to block a monkey at that point, or they get can't block for a turn. And at that point, yeah, you can crack back with the vigilance. I get it, but to me, a History of Benalia is not where you want to be in standard at the point. So a card that's a $10 card, I think, is just very overinflated at the moment. Even though I do believe this will see play, just not enough of it to have that $10 mythic price. On to the number 5. Number 5 is a card that I think is currently underrated as a mythic, which is another $5 mythic, which is Weatherlight. Weatherlight, I think, fits perfectly in the meta right now. It can already be slotted into Mardu vehicles. I think it's a great sideboard option, even if it doesn't see main board. But I can see them going heavier on vehicles. Vehicles already has 3 creatures that can crew it no problem. Then it's also some of those creatures, if you're going into like Tapala or Pia Nalar, they can actually be hit off of the Weatherlight. So like the Toolcraft Exemplars and the Scrappy Scroungers can crew it. The Weatherlight can go find more Heart of Karan. So if one Heart of Karan gets Fatal Push, you have a backup one. It can go find your Chandras. It can go find any other legendary creatures that might get shooed into that slot, like the Hazarets even. So Weatherlight, I think, is underrated at the moment. The Crew 3 is a pretty steep crew cost, but in a format that we already have things that want to crew, like the Veteran Motorist, like the Toolcraft Exemplar, I think that the Weatherlight will find its way into a lot of Mardu Vehicles decks. And so right out the gates, if a Mythic does see play, I think it's destined to go up. I'm not saying long term that this doesn't settle back down to the $5 mark or even lower. I'm thinking short term, though, this is going to see a bit of a boost when it does see play in those vehicle decks, maybe even sees play in a few other decks that really want to. I'm even thinking the red decks could utilize this if it's like a bigger red. You get that it's all about hitting those Chandras and Hazarets, so this allows you to dig for them. And a 4/5 body for 4, just being crewed by a card that at that point could be outclassed. He's got Evasion, I think is pretty underrated at the moment. So I'm liking Weatherlight as the mythic that is going to go up in value. On to my number 4, which is a definite bust, is the Cobble Stronghold. The Cobble Stronghold is currently sitting at $5, which I think is very wishful thinking. I don't think this is going to see a lot of play in Commander, which is where people are anticipating this because they're comparing it to the Cobble Coffers. And you can't even compare the two. First of all, the Stronghold does not synergize with the Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, so therefore this is going to be a lot tougher to put in 2-color decks, as you're not going to have enough swamps to actually make this worthwhile. In Modern, it doesn't even synergize with the cards that are not basic swamps. So we're talking about like the Shocklands have the 2 land types, or even the Battle for Zendikar lands, or have the 2-card types, or even the cycling lands. They have the basic land types put onto them, do not work with the Cobbled Stronghold. And another big thing is it's 3 in tap, not 2 in tap. That makes a world of difference because this doesn't start to pay off itself until you have 4 swamps, as then you'll be able to tap the Cobble Stronghold for 4 mana, and then the other swamp can be tapped for 5. If you try to tap it when you have 3 swamps out, you're actually net down mana because it's only adding 3 mana in your mana pool for the cost of 4 lands. And the one thing that Cobble Stronghold does have going for it is you can tap to add a colorless. So that's one of the problems like Cobble Coffers or some of these other lands in the past. Either they're coming to play tapped or they've had some other just you can't even utilize them without their ability. This you can, but I'm not seeing it as very relevant for a lot of decks. Sure, a few mono black decks will want it. There is a shade, the Dredge Shade, that looks like mono black could be a thing. There's also like a big kicker card in the set that would want the Cobble Stronghold. However, this card is bad in multiples. If you have multiples in your hand, then they don't work together. You still have to find those more swamps, and so it's kind of like a non-bow in that way. So they could have put a legendary land on. They could have put it as a legendary land and made it a little bit better. And I think if this would have even made 2 and tap, I would have preferred it over just putting it as just a land. Because you don't want it as multiples. It's hard for me to see where this card is actually going to be played heavily. I think Commander is going to be okay in certain decks, but not going to be a shoe-in like the Cobble Coffers or Brook to Yawgmoth combo. And the same thing with Standard. It's not, if you look at the Dredge Shade, it doesn't synergize very well with the Dredge Shade because you want your Dredge Shade to come out on turn 3. And then if you have a Cobble Stronghold stuck in or having to play that as one of your lands on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, then you're looking at like a turn 4 at that point. So people have been talking about this might make a good Torment of Hailfire mono black deck. Sure, I get it. It could see play, but a $5 rare is like something that's going to, no matter what, see a lot of play. And I don't see this happening for the Cobble Stronghold. It's going to go in maybe 1 or 2 decks, and they're not going to be tier decks, and that's going to be that. So this is destined to go down. On to my number 4. Speaking of the Shade, out of the cycle, this is the one I like the best for its price point. It's $1.75. The Dredge Shade is a 3/3 for 3 mana, triple black, and it's got the typical Shade ability to get +1 until end of turn. I think this is right where it wants to be. It takes work to kill this with Fatal Push and Standard. I think that mono black is actually in pretty good shape. It's got everything going for it, and especially in like a heavy control based deck, this could be your finisher for that particular deck, as it comes out as a 3/3 for 3, so it hits that curve perfectly, and then any excess mana can be turned into damage. So even on turn 4, if there's an open board, for example, and there's nothing else you want to do, you can attack in for 7. The turn after this card comes out. It can even skip turns where you don't want to pump anything in because you need to kill something, and it still hits in for 3. That's what makes it a lot different from Shades of the past, where Shades were pretty worthless unless you actually did pump the mana into them. Now this one is just a permanently 3/3 that then has that Shade ability. So I like this card a lot. I think that if it sees play in a deck, it probably will see play as a 4 of. And unlike the Cobble Stronghold, I think it's being rated for like the mono black list, where this card it's pretty good to protect itself from just 1 mana protects itself from Lightning Strike. It can even get above like Hour of Devastation or Yahini's Expertise. So you could actually even play those particular cards in a deck like this for a late game board wipe, and still be able to. A lot of you got to think too. We have the 2 mana sweeper out of Ixalan. When these premier fumigate type sweepers or Hour of Devastation rotate, people might be relying on like the 2 damage non-pirate Pyroclasm, or the one that does City of Blessing, -2 to everything. Those type of cards might be the premier removal sweepers for early game, and the Dredge Shade can actually be used with them, or it dodges it and sweeps the board, or it can actually get above quite easily from those a bunch of those type of sweepers. So I think that Dredge Shade's in a good place at $1.75. I like this more of a $3, $4 if it does see play in a particular mono black shell. On to number 3, which is Shalai's Voice of Plenty. I think this card is insanely overrated. I think Commander players are overrating it. I think the Standard players are overrating it. This is a 4 mana angel that's a 3/4. And you, planeswalkers you control, and other creatures you control have hexproof. And then for 6 mana, you can put a +1 counter on each creature you control. So it has kind of like a standard bearer effect, meaning that you have to kill it before then you can kill a lot of your opponent's cards. It doesn't really dodge Fatal Push at the moment. It doesn't dodge a lot of the removal spells at the moment. And of course, your 4-drop is going to be your threat. That's a pivotal position for a lot of standard game plan is your 4-drop. And so if your 4-drop isn't like this huge threat, that gets value immediately when it comes out, a lot of times it's not playable, and it's just gonna eat a removal spell, which is probably going to be a removal spell that costs less than this, or something that gets some sort of value like Vraska's Contempt, and then they're free to pick off your little weenies that you've cast before this. So it's not really to set yourself up to protect your later planeswalkers, like an Ajani, for example, if people are thinking this green-white Ajani deck, or Huatli or something like that. It's just really weird on curve. I think that for this ability to actually be useful, need to be earlier or be later with a bigger body. The 4 curve with this is just very, very awkward when you're analyzing this card of where it's going to fit. All right, on to my number 2. Now this is where it gets really juicy, because I think these are the 2 big winners and losers. This is Precognition Field. Precognition Field is definitely a boom. This is currently sitting at $1. And this reminds me of cards like the Torment of Hailfire, or what's the other card that came out? There's always one per set where people, it seems really tough for it to be played in either modern or standard, so it goes down to bulk rate, when people don't recognize just how busted this card is in Commander. I'm thinking that almost the vast majority of blue decks are going to want this in their Commander deck, especially if they have instant or sorceries. So any effect that we've had in the past, like Courser Crew fixes, like the Vizier of the Menagerie, like I've had a lot of hype behind them, and I've actually seen a fair amount of play. Now, there isn't a lot of abilities that can do something like this. Yes, blue does if you go way back, where you can play the top card of your library. This allows you to go through your deck, and also the exile top card of your library is pretty decent in a blue Commander deck, as a lot of times you'll have a bunch of mana when you're storming off, that if you get hit with a land card on top of your library, it's effectively 3 mana scry, but even better, just get rid of it permanently. So I think so you can cast the top card of your library if it's an instant or sorcery. So busted with a ton of different Commander decks. I actually think this is standard playable. I think there will be a lot of decks that can utilize this if you're like heavy into instances of sorceries, as it almost feels like an Outpost Siege in the right deck, where it's just additional draws per turn, or additional card advantage per turn if you're in the heavy. Think of like the Search for Azcanta type decks. Yes, they can get planeswalkers and other non-land permanents, or non-creatures, non-lands, right? Is that what Search for Azcanta does? I can't even think of it at the moment exactly what it does, but allows you to just keep casting things off the top of your library for card advantage, and I think it's very, very even underrated for standard. I think it's playable in modern, and the $1 price tag is insanely low to me. This is the big winner out of the set, in my opinion, as far as pre-sale prices. Now, we've had the big winner. Let's talk about the big loser. This should come to no surprise to most people. This is the Mocs Amber. I think Mocs Amber is too situational for this to be played as a multiple in tons of decks. Like, people have talked about it in modern with like there's a lot of 1-drops, especially with the old school Isumaru. You go first turn Isumaru, that means you can get like 2 aggressive creatures out on turn 1. And then what, though? You've kind of cost yourself a card. Then later on, it can be tapped to, you can even cast it to tap your Thalia, for example. A turn 2 Thalia, Heretic Cathar. Sure, I get it. But at that point, what really is your game plan? A lot of aggro decks you don't even want fast mana to begin with. I'm trying to think of a deck that actually does have a legendary creature or planeswalker that comes out early that wants the fast mana. If not, you're looking at this coming out on turn 3, turn 4. To then ramp into something. I don't like Mocs Amber. I think it's just too dirtly in your hand, too situational. Too many things have to go perfectly for this to see play, and the $30 price tag is just insane to me. I think this is as much. This is going to settle down to even below 10 is reasonable until maybe it does find that home where a brewer actually does find a good slot for the Mocs Amber. But right now it's just wishful thinking. I don't think that anything's been identified where this makes this busted. People have tried to compare it in the past. Well, Chrome Mocs, Opal. Yeah, but those right out the gates, you could tell that they had a lot more synergy, a lot easier to get them to be able to activate. Whereas the Mocs Amber seems a lot more difficult, a lot more situational, and doesn't justify the $30 price tag. So that's kind of my list here. We got 5 booms, 5 busts. Again, for my predictions for booms, I like the Gilded Lotus, the Jaya's Immolating Inferno, Weatherlight, the Dredge Shade, and the Precognition Field. For cards, I suggest that you sell off as quickly as possible the Karn Scion of Urza, the History of Benalia, the Cobble Stronghold, Shalai Voice of Plenty, and the Mocs Amber. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comment section below. And if you have any other cards that you think that are undervalued or overhyped at the moment, feel free to put your own list in the comment section, or any other advice you could add to this discussion. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckbuilder.com. Thanks for watching.